Hello, SpongicX here, and today I'm going to review Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity for Nintendo Switch. So after putting like 36 hours into this, I finally got through the main campaign of the game, and overall, I liked the game overall. It was pretty good. Hard to say if I liked it more than Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition, because when you think about it, Definitive Edition definitely is packed with more content. However, it's just a lot of it is too repetitive though, and it's a real chore to get through. I mean, I spent years trying to 100% that game, and I just did earlier this year while waiting for Age of Calamity to come out, and man, that was exhausting. I put in like over 300 hours into that game, and oh man, some of the unlockable requirements were ridiculous. It was not all fun and games, and not to mention the game was pretty glitchy at times, but still, Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition was still a guilty pleasure to me. And so I was looking forward to Age of Calamity. And overall, I can say, while the content isn't as packed as Definitive Edition, like there's less characters, less level variety, and all that, but when it comes to like story and gameplay and progression, I would say Age of Calamity beats the original. It's just a more well grounded game. Because, yeah, there were some really unfair and punishing challenges in Hyrule Warriors, and they expect you to be like level 300 or something like that just to be able to have a fair chance at tackling them. Not to mention how a lot of these challenges had like time limits or limitations, and it just really made the game a real mess. And while Age of Calamity still has some of those mission structures, there's less of them though, and they're more like side missions, and you do get rewarded for beating them though. And I still have yet to unlock everything in the game, but I just got the main story done, and I was completing as many missions as I could along the way, though. But then, of course, after you beat the game, you're bombarded with a bunch of new missions to tackle. So I have yet to attempt those. But I just feel like Age of Calamity is a more rewarding game, though. And I feel like the gameplay, though, is a really huge improvement. Where the maps in the original Definitive Edition were really messy and just not fun to go through. So many of those levels had like one-way tracks where there was only one way to go a certain area, and then once you go past it, it's like you got to go a really long ways just to get back to where you previously were. And they tried fixing that in the Definitive Edition by adding, the Ocarina power where it could allow you to warp to owl statues, but they weren't used in every mission, and it still was really time-consuming to use those. And not to mention, the item navigation in Hyrule Warriors, every single version of the original version was just terrible. The Wii U was the most tolerable, though, because switching between the weapons was really built for the Wii U gamepad, where you could drag in the direction you wanted to, choose your weapon, but it did not translate well on the 3DS or the Switch version. And so, yeah, not only were the items really pointless, but they were needed to get through certain obstacles and certain levels, but overall they were really weak and powerless. It's like, and toggling between them was just such an annoyance, and it didn't really feel like they were helpful in combat either, except for certain boss fights. And in this game, the items are a huge improvement, and I love how each character has their own unique way of using them. So the items are based on your Sheikah tablet abilities from Breath of the Wild, and so yeah, this game borrows a lot from Breath of the Wild, and it mixes it in cleverly with the gameplay of the Dynasty Warriors. It just works really well though. I was really impressed. Hyrule Warriors felt like a Warriors game with a Zelda makeover, and in a way, Age of Calamity felt like a Breath of the Wild game with a Warriors makeover, if you know what I mean. It's similar, but I don't know. I just thought it was really cool how they did a really good job at making it feel like Breath of the Wild in certain areas. I mean, there are definitely moments where you can tell, like, yeah, Breath of the Wild pulled that off more technically impressive, but otherwise, yeah, the item navigation is really great in this, and I love how each character has their own unique way of using their weapons. So you have like the bombs, and so, like, Link, he'll rapidly throw the bombs at enemies, and they do a bit more damage than they did in Hyrule Warriors, where they were so weak and useless. Here, it actually doesn't. It can knock out some enemies, or at least take out half their HP. So, Yeah, they are useful if you're surrounded by a bunch of enemies at a weaker level. Once your character gets a little stronger, though, your attacks will become more powerful than the bombs, so you'll less likely want to use the bombs. But starting off as like a weak character, yeah, the bombs were helpful, and they're still necessary in order to fight certain bosses. And but I love how each character has their own unique animation and attack style when using those. So some will be more explosive, some will be slower, some will be more gimmicky than others, and it's just really cool. It gives you a reason to want to play as these characters because you prefer how they throw the bombs or something like that. And the bosses were the biggest improvement, in my opinion. I hated the boss fights in Hyrule Warriors. They were such a fun idea, but they were just too time consuming and too faulty, too gimmicky. You just couldn't attack them normally. I mean, yeah, it's appropriate because, like in most Zelda games, you had to wait for a boss to show their weak point to attack them. But still, it felt like there were certain bosses where the ones that you could actually go close up to, you could rapidly attack them and deal some massive damage. And Hyrule Warriors does not allow you to do that. If you tried attacking an enemy, not only would it barely do anything to them, but it would agitate them and cause them to start spamming attacks. And you're waiting for them to open their weak point, but when they're spamming attacks, it takes forever for them to do that. And that's real frustrating when you're trying to play under a time limit. So many missions want you to defeat many bosses at once under a time limit, and Hyrule Warriors made it frustrating and sometimes nearly impossible because of how buggy and glitchy the bosses were. And so in this game, not only are the bosses more they don't feel as buggy, they feel better programmed, and just defeating them was more fun. You actually did get to deal some regular damage on them. It's not always smart to try attacking them head first, though, but it's really helpful, though. It allows you to try to, play it at your own risk or pace. And so if you want to get up and close to some of these bosses and attack them before they start swinging at you, go ahead. Try and do it, and their weaknesses were just so much more fun to attack in this game. It just felt like they were easier to defeat. And, I mean, some of them were still challenging, though, but they weren't as time-consuming or frustratingly long as the ones in the original Hyrule Warriors. And there's a pretty good variety of villains, too. So while there are still a few elements of the original Warriors gameplay in there, because usually it's where, like, you're controlling one end of an army, fighting another, and you gotta defeat the other soldiers while defending your own bases and all that. And so I always hated how Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition, it had just way too many missions where, like, one thing's happening on one end of a level, so you're running over there, but then something drastic happens on the other end of a level, and they expect you to do that, so you try going there as well, but then all of a sudden you get reported that one of your allies are in danger, or your base is in danger, and if you don't act fast, game over, you're forced to start completely over from the beginning, and that was really frustrating. I hated that, and so it looks like this game is a little more forgiving. I mean, there are some brutal challenges in this game, but they actually have some checkpoints. And I barely died in this game, though. I did not die at all during the story mode, but I did die a few times during some of the mission modes. Because there are some missions where they expect you to beat it without getting hit or something like that, or beat a certain number of enemies under a time limit. And so there were times where I messed up, but then I said retry, and then it just took me back to a checkpoint, and so I didn't have to start entirely over. And so it's like, okay, that was more forgiving, because even then the part I was stuck on was still pretty challenging. And so this game is a little more forgiving. It's more about just defeating enemies instead of defending bases, and it doesn't feel as overwhelming. I mean, yeah, in some of the later levels it does bombard you with a bunch of enemies at once, but it isn't as brutal as some of the past Warrior games, though. It gives you a much more fair chance of defeating these enemies without running out of time and all of that. And so this was just more fun, because I mostly just like playing these games to, just look all cool and badass as these awesome characters, just defeating hundreds of enemies at once and leveling up your character, making them stronger, getting unlockables and currency to get more items. And that's the fun I find in Hyrule Warriors. But then some of the annoying aspects of the game just really dragged it on for me, and so it made it kind of like a guilty pleasure for me. It's like the good in there is good, but the bad just kind of almost outweighs the good in certain times. But it's not enough for me to say it's a bad game, though, just a flawed game with great potential. And so I feel like Age of Calamity did a much better job at fixing the formula of Hyrule Warriors. It took everything I loved about Hyrule Warriors and kind of amped it up. However, if there are a few flaws I do have with this game that are inferior to um, the original definitive edition, at least, it would be the graphics and frame rate. So this one wanted to heavily design it to look exactly like Breath of the Wild, and for the most part, it achieves that. Like at least when it comes to some of the characters and level designs. I mean, like the lighting and shading still looks very simplified. And I don't know, I was never really a huge fan of Breath of the Wild's art style for say. I mean, the environments are beautiful. I love, like how the grass, the water, and all that looks, but then you have the character models and their shading. I just thought it did not mix very well. Now, personally, I thought the designs in like Twilight Princess were the best. It was trying to go more realistic, but it still had some cartoony proportions. The only complaint I had with it was it could have used a little more color here and there, but ever since like Skyward Sword, I've been kind of disappointed with the art style Zelda games I've chosen. They're suddenly just too colorful and cartoony, and I don't know. I mean, Breath of the Wild, the environments look great, no doubt about that. But I don't know, the character models just and their shading, like how they look semi-cell shaded. It's like a part of me wishes the shading was a little softer, more detailed. And I don't like how it's just like so solid. It just does not match with these models very well, and it looks especially worse in this game. Like there are certain times where like a character moves their hand, and the way like the shading reflects off them just doesn't look natural. It's just too solid and dark in this game. I just don't like the shading of Breath of the Wild very much. The character models aren't that great either. I mean, some of the character designs could have worked. I mean, I've even seen fan artists, like draw these designs, and they drew them even better than the way Nintendo did. I don't know, or something about like the eyes, the eyebrows, the lips. I don't know. I just don't like the faces in this game for like Zelda and Link at least. But it's like some of the original characters look great though. I mean, like the champions, they look nice. But as for our main leads though, it's like I'm not the biggest fan of their design, honestly. The graphics, while they do highly resemble the ones from Breath of the Wild, they're not as great as them though. Like the physics are definitely not as good. The Warrior games definitely do feel like cheap games at times, like the way certain characters move or the way certain objects can clip through each other. It is really wonky at times, and this game is no exception. Just like every other past Warrior games, it feels really cheap in gameplay. Now, honestly, though, like out of all their stylized Warrior games, this one is the most pleasant to look at, though, environment-wise. More like if you look at it in a still image form, because in motion, the game can sometimes be very nauseating. Certain graphics are glitching in and out. Like I noticed, like there are plenty of times where you move the camera and you see rocks in the ground. 1 minute they're there, 1 minute they're not. They're just flickering in and out of the scenery, and it can get really nauseating. And the camera, oh my god, it is. Oh god. Now it's not as bad as the one from Hyrule Warriors. Like that one was really frustrating to deal with, like especially when too many enemies are on screen at once. And so the camera overall is impressive in this game. It's a little bit better. However, it still has major flaws though. So you can actually rotate the camera when locking onto an enemy this time. So that's real convenient for like if you're fighting like a real tall towering boss and you kind of want to scroll the camera up a little more vertically, up or down, so you can get a better view of where the enemy is. And so you couldn't do that in Hyrule Warriors, but you can do that in this version. However, it's still not good enough though, because the like when you're walking onto a boss, sometimes like they'll just get too close to the screen, and then it'll squish you in between a hard to see place, and the camera just gets all wonky and glitches out during that. And yeah, it's really nauseating. And so it's like this would have worked better if they chose better places to put some of these bosses, because these big bosses just don't work in these cramped areas, because it just causes the camera to get all confused. And yeah, that was not fun to go through at times. And like I wouldn't say it was enough for me to die in any areas though, but yeah, I did have some trouble though, to where I wasn't sure if I was going to get out of there. And yeah, that was pretty pesky. And then the frame rate in this is really bad. I'll even say it's possibly worse than the original Hyrule Warriors. Now, I can't say if it's worse than the 3DS version, because, oh god, that was terrible. Never played it, though, but I've heard I've heard people talk about it. I've seen videos of it, and yeah, but I remember the original Hyrule Warriors. I mean, it looked good for a Wii U game, but its frame rate was horrible. Every time you used a special attack or moved forward or pressed a button, the gameplay would just slow down drastically. And they fixed it with Definitive Edition. It ran so much smoother, at least when you're running in docked mode. But then as for Age of Calamity, oh man, the frame rate was just so bad. But on the bright side, though, most of the attacks are pretty quick and swift, though. They don't seem as long and drawn out, time consuming as the ones you saw in the original Hyrule Warriors. So, spamming them and seeing the frame rate drastically drag it down isn't as infuriating as it was in the original Hyrule Warriors. But, yeah, there's no denying, though. The frame rate in this is just so bad. And it's most likely to blame because of, Tecmo Koei. They do not have the best track record when it comes to frame rates of some certain games. I mean, some of their games can run pretty smoothly, like the Ninja Gaiden or Dead or Alive series. Those are pretty fast-paced. But, oh man, like, when it comes to their Warrior spin-offs, though, those are usually very sluggish. But it's just so surprising how sluggish this one is. I mean, they've made quite a comeback. You could say, like, games like, Warriors Orochi 3 Hyper, or even, Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition. They had smoother frame rates in some of their previous outings on PS2 and stuff like that, but, yeah, this game runs like a lagging PS2 game, and the graphics do look really weird at times, and so it's just really uncanny compared to how well they looked in the original Breath of the Wild, like, running through water, how it made, like, convincing splash effects. Then this game, it looks like there's no collision to when a character is touching the water, so it just looks like they're running across the ground and you're hearing like splash sound effects, but you're not actually seeing any splashes or ripples, and it just looks weird. Replayability is more fun than Hyrule Warriors, where that one was more time-consuming, more repetitive, because it required a lot of synthesizing, and some of the items they just did not give you enough opportunities to earn plenty of items. It doesn't help that there were so many items that you could only get through certain bosses, and bosses are really time consuming, like I mentioned, and so it sucks when like you're putting so many minutes or hours into fighting a boss, trying to get a certain number of rare items you need from them in order to get that certain upgrade for a character, but then you're always getting the dud item when you defeat the boss. You're getting the drop item from the boss you didn't want, and that is so frustrating. And so it looks like in this game, though, there aren't too many drop items that are exclusive to bosses. It seems like instead of getting like many different pieces from them, it's like most likely you're just gonna get a trophy of them, is what they call it. It's like a certificate that proves you defeated them, and so that's easier. It just means you just got to beat them once and you get a drop item from them that's needed to synthesize for certain characters. And so yeah, it's still a grind. It's still time consuming and possibly repetitive, but it's a little more forgiving in this game. It's not as frustrating as it was in the original Hyrule Warriors. So the Sheikah Slate items have unlimited usage, but there is a cooldown wait time for each time you use it, so to prevent you from spamming these like crazy and being overpowered. So that's a fair catch. There's also a few other items you can get, which are more like temporary power-ups, but they're based on the magic rods that you got for defeating the wizards in the game. So you get like the ice, the fire, and the electric wands, and you can use them to cast spells on certain enemies, and it can trigger certain weaknesses. Like if you're fighting a fire enemy, it helps you use like the ice wand against them and stuff like that. Or if you're facing a bunch of enemies in water, use the lightning one and that'll shock them all, and that's a great strategy as well. And so yeah, there's some fun creative ways to use these items in the game. And now as for like the characters with their weapons, so each character mostly has like one assigned weapon, but then there's a few different variants of them they can get, and sometimes they'll have like a special rare material item equipped to them where you can mix them with other ones and synthesize ultimate weapons, similar to the original Hyrule Warriors, where you could mix certain item elements together. This one's a little more simplified though, and it's cool how you can even combine weapons and level them up. It's like most weapons seem to go up to like level 20, but I think there is a way to expand that even further down the line by synthesizing on the overworld map and all that. And so yeah, that's pretty neat. But so each character mostly has like one weapon style, except for Link and Zelda, but you have to unlock Zelda's later. So Zelda, she starts off as like one of the most useless characters, it feels like, but that was probably well-intentioned, though. In Breath of the Wild, Zelda had many doubts about herself, and she kept comparing herself to everyone else and thinking she's no help to the fight and all that. And so I think that was intentional. They wanted her moveset to feel very unfun to use at first, despite how it has a cool concept, though. It's just like her attacks are just too slow, and she just attacks with the Sheikah Slate, and I don't know, like, her abilities looked cool at first, but in the end, you just feel they're just too weak and not fast enough. And I feel like that was intentional, though, because eventually her true power awakens and she's able to use light arrows, and so that's then treated like a separate weapon. You have to equip the light arrows if you want to play in that style of Zelda. And so that's pretty cool. But for the most part, each character isn't very customizable or anything. After you beat the game, though, you are given the option to switch between some costumes for some of the other characters, but it's only costumes from like their before and after states, basically. Because like for instance, Zelda's original design in this game, she's wearing like the blue shirt with the black pants, and but then it's like towards the battle, she's wearing like her I'm not sure what you call it, like a sacred suit or whatever. It's like that white dress and ceremonial dress or something like that. I don't know, but so all of a sudden she's wearing that, and so for the rest of the game, you're forced to play as Zelda in that dress. But then after you beat the game, you're given the option if you want to go back and change her outfit, basically. But so unlike the original Hyrule Warriors, there aren't a whole bunch of alternate costumes for each of these characters, unfortunately. However, Link has a bit of a dress-up gimmick taken straight from the game it's from, Breath of the Wild. You can unlock a lot of his costume pieces and equip them separately from both his headgear, his armor, and his pants, basically. And so it's even possible to unlock his original outfit from, like Ocarina of Time and all of that, but you have to work really hard to unlock those. I still haven't even gotten those costumes yet, but it is kind of unfortunate, though. I was hoping there would be a little more variety to customizing characters, but there are still some neat little shout-outs to the past games, though, or Breath of the Wild, I mean, like, there's the dye shop, because, like, in Breath of the Wild, there's that dye shop, and just like in that game, you can take some of your armor there, and he'll change the color of it for an expensive price, and so yeah, fun little shout out to Breath of the Wild, fun little feature. But so Link, he has like 3 different weapon choices. He has his regular sword items, which can include like sword and shield, boomerangs, or just other little items. And then he has the 2-handed swords. That's pretty self-explanatory. Bigger, heavier items that need 2 hands to wield. And then he also has spear items, and so they have like a wide variety of them, some for, but you can't hold on to every single one of them, just like the original game. It has limited inventory space, so you're forced to sell or merge certain items together when you're like running low on space, and so it's impossible to have like one of each item, which is unfortunate, because I tried doing that at first. I tried collecting one of each weapon, but then I was forced to give some of them up, and that's one thing I hate about Breath of the Wild, but at least the weapons don't break in this game, and you can actually level them up. That's a feature I would love to see in the next, Breath of the Wild sequel. I'd love to see them actually make it possible to where you can earn the privilege to make them, invincible, basically. That would be awesome. I'd love that. And level them up and stuff like that. And so it was neat how this game gave you that option. The items don't break after like 3 uses, and that's great. I love that. One gameplay feature in this game that sounded really cool at first, but turned out to be a huge disappointment, was the Divine Beast. Now, this game like teased that you actually got to pilot the Divine Beast in certain segments and fight off like hordes of enemies like crazy, using like these giant animal-like, Titanic-looking, I don't know what you call them, buildings, robots, I don't know, but just like these giant ancient weapons, basically, guardians, and so in this, it was kind of cool to be able to pilot them, but the controls and the gameplay of it were really frustrating to the point where they just weren't really fun to go through. So one of the biggest problems I had was the camera angle. They decided to try to give it like a semi-first-person shooter look to it. It's like not first-person, but not third-person. It's just a really close over-the-shoulder view of like the front of the vehicle. And so it was really hard to see like where you were stepping or where you were moving. The controls were clunky as hell. I would say like they were tank control bad, but even worse. They were harder to control than a video game tank. And I don't know. The motion controls were terrible, so I shut those off and just used the right analog aiming. And but yeah, they were just so clunky, so slow, and sometimes they felt kind of unresponsive. And I just was not a fan of it. Like, my least favorite one definitely was the gecko, or I'm not sure what you. I can't remember the names of any of these, but the Goron one, the giant flaming gecko, that was the worst and most useless one. I hated that one the most. And if there's one that I had slight enjoyment in playing in, it would be the flying bird one, Rivali's. That one felt more fun to play. It felt like a cross between Star Fox and Godzilla or something like that. It felt like you were controlling a kaiju monster, like a flying kaiju monster, but in Star Fox-like gameplay, because you're shooting lasers and kind of fitting that the character you're controlling during that part looks like Falco. But yeah, that was the only Divine Beast I actually enjoyed. And I'll admit, even Urbosa, the giant camel guardian or Divine Beast, that one was alright, I guess. That was the last one you unlock, and that one's arguably the most powerful, but at a huge cost, though. It has like a recharge limit, because it can shoot electricity out of itself, but it takes a while to reload. But it has other few abilities that kind of help balance it out. It has like a charge ram attack and all these other things, and so it's like but most of them have like a very similar function. They just slowly travel across these lands, and they have like a primary fire attack. They have like some kind of counter or shield attack, and some kind of physical melee attack. But each one has like their own different way of handling things. But overall, I thought the gecko was the worst. The flying bird was the best. The camel was second best, and the elephant, while not as bad as the gecko, it wasn't as good as the others. But yeah, I don't know. The Divine Beasts, they sounded really fun at first, but in execution, they were kind of underwhelming. But I'll admit, the destruction during that was really fun, though. But if only the frame rate and visuals weren't so bad during that part. Like, I wish this game had a better camera, not only for the Divine Beast, but even the other areas. Like, I wish there was a way to zoom in and out of the camera, because you can only swerve it up, down, left, and right, and around, but you can't zoom in or out. And there were so many times where I wanted to pull the camera far back, so especially like when there were too many big enemies or things on screen at once. There are times where I wanted to back the camera up, but no, the camera's insisting it shove it right in my face, and that was so annoying. As for playable characters, while this one doesn't have as big of a roster as it did with Hyrule Warriors and its DLC, the roster was still pretty good, though. It's like you were expecting the basics, like Link, Zelda, and the 4 champions from Breath of the Wild, but there's also a few bonus characters in there, including Hestu, best character in the series. You got Impa, who is much more pleasant to look at in this game compared to her elderly form from Breath of the Wild. Oh my god. And then you got quite a few surprising like guest characters, including like the King of Hyrule, the Great Fairies, the monks, and Koga from the Yuga tribe. And so yeah, those were quite unexpected additions. And I just love how, is it just me or did anyone else think Koga sounded like Shake from Aqua Teen Hunger Force in this game? I don't know, his voice just cracked me up.
You've got some nerve, thinking you can go toe-to-toe with Master Koga!
But, so there's also a few other bonus characters you can unlock in this game that were big surprises, but like, I was expecting, if anything, they would have been post-game content, but the way they were presented, I'll get to that in spoiler territories. So, yeah, let's talk about the story in this game. And it's hard to talk about the story in this game without talking about spoilers, so if you do not want any spoilers, please log out of the video now. You've been warned. But, otherwise, when it comes to the story in this game, everyone was predicting what was going to happen. I mean, Nintendo was promoting this game as, see what happened 100 years before the Calamity struck, and so, yeah, this was basically a prequel to Breath of the Wild. It was supposed to show us, you know, like, how the events unfolded. So everyone was expecting a Halo Reach situation. They were expecting everyone to die tragically in the end, and I'll even admit, I was anticipating that, and Nintendo, they really subverted our expectations with this game, though, and so it's hard to say if this game is an actual prequel to Breath of the Wild, like if it's considered canon or not, because at first it feels like a canon game. It does feel like it's telling the original story as it was meant to, but then there's a huge plot twist, like midway through the game, and it changes everything. And I gotta say though, like when it's then like halfway through the game where it actually starts feeling more like a Warriors game, because Warrior games usually have the cliche where like the game usually starts off where like a magic portal appears and many characters from different worlds are dropped into one world or something, and they have to work together or fight each other to figure out what's going on. And so it's surprising how this is like one of the first Warrior games where it doesn't go in that direction. I mean, it vaguely does at the beginning, though, but just for one little moment. So, the game starts off where it shows, the Calamity has struck. It shows, like, Hyrule Castle's been taken over by Calamity Ganon. You see, like, all these guardians rising up and, taking over. But then there's, like, this little guardian, like a little baby egg-shaped guardian, and he opens a portal and somehow goes back in time, and it seems like he's looking for Zelda. This little guardian goes back in time somehow, and it's not explained how. It's just able to open up a portal. It goes back in time. So the cutscenes in this game were pretty entertaining. It shows you how like Link and the others recruited all the other champions, and unfortunately, it does not show any of the cutscenes from the original Breath of the Wild. It doesn't show how they pieced together. And I was kind of hoping for that. I was hoping for because, throughout the game, Link had amnesia, and he's uncovering memories of, the characters he's met in the past. So you see him interacting with the champions, having conflicts with Zelda and stuff like that. And so it's like you're confused with them because they're kind of disjointed. And that's one of the biggest problems people had with the story in Breath of the Wild. It had an interesting concept, but no connection. It's like it expected players to piece the stuff together, and some people just weren't interested, though. They didn't want to use their minds to know the story. They just wanted the story to be shown and told at the same time. And so people just compare it to how other games, the plots got them more engaged. But Breath of the Wild was trying too hard for people to have their own experience. It gave them the freedom to go wherever they wanted first. And so it was a cool approach, but at the same time, it made people wish there was more narrative to that game. And so it's kind of interesting to see a Breath of the Wild related story that is, while not perfect, it's more structured. It does have like a beginning, a middle, and an end. It doesn't bridge everything perfectly well together, though, but it definitely subverted expectations, though. But for the most part, the cutscenes were really entertaining, though. The voice acting feels like it stepped up quite a bit, despite how they used the same voice actors from Breath of the Wild. I mean, Zelda's voice still kind of bugged me a bit. I don't know. She just sounded a little too mature, and her British accent was just a little too thick in this, and I don't know. I kind of wish they got someone a little more younger and sprightly sounding for her, but like characters like Mipha, though, like I hated her voice in the original, and she sounded a lot better in this, though. She didn't sound as whispery, and I don't know. I just thought she was more easier to listen to in this. And then, Rivali, he's still such an unlikable prick, but you just can't help but think he's so cool, though. And, like all the other characters, they still did a good job. And it was interesting to see more interactions with these characters, see more personalities out of these characters. Like, I was really impressed with how Impa was portrayed, because we all know Impa. There's many different versions of Impa throughout the Zelda timeline, and she's always seen as, like, an elderly but wise, like, warrior or something like that, or former warrior, and so Breath of the Wild's take on her was a little different. She looked really bizarre and, dare I say, even hideous, and so you see her younger version, and she's, like, a completely different character. She didn't seem like the responsible type you usually see, like, where in most games she's seen as, like, the strict bodyguard for Zelda, like in Skyward Sword, how she had actually, like, criticized Link for not being ready to protect her, and she would be harsh on Link, and even Ocarina of Time, it's like she was kind of mysterious, and she seemed kind of mean at first, but, so this version of Impa, like, a more younger version of Impa, possibly, like, the same age as Zelda, it's like, she just had so much personality. Like, you would see her, like, get angry or annoyed with things. You'd see her, like, chase the little robot thing around, and, like, she's yelling, like, come back here, and stuff like that. And, I don't know, she was just really fun to watch. And, yeah, they just gave this character so much personality that you weren't expecting to see from a version of Impa. And I really love the cutscenes in this game, but So then when it came to the moment where Calamity Ganon rose up, and it's like you can piece together exactly when Link was supposed to die in the original story. There's a part where he's surrounded by all the Blight Ganons, all the bosses you had to face in the original Breath of the Wild. And there's a part where he's surrounded by them, and Impa is forced to take Zelda someplace safe, and she's begging Impa not to do this because Link is gonna die if they don't protect him or something like that. And so it's like right at that moment you're expected that's when Link was supposed to die in the original story, but then something strange happens. Like the divine beast getting possessed, and champions are trying to regain control of it, and so it gives you the implication that was the moment where they were supposed to die, but then the unthinkable happens. Their future descendants appear to the past and aid the champions. So, and it was all done thanks to the little robot guardian. I think his name was Terrico. But so yeah, that was quite a shock. That was when I realized, okay, now this is starting to turn into a Warriors game, but it still left me puzzled though. So are they deviating from the plot of the original, or is this still tie into the same gruesome fate? But because although we saw a bunch of these heroes from the future coming back to the past to aid the champions, it still left you to wonder though, is this game still going to have the same unhappy ending as the original? And so it left me wondering, though, because the game was really building up to somewhat have a happier ending. So I was waiting for, like, that one tragic moment where everything sets in motion. No matter how much they try to change fate, it just couldn't be changed or something. I was really expecting that to happen, and no. Link defeats Calamity Ganon along with the aid of Zelda and the other champions. And, I mean, Zelda's father's even still alive, and none of the champions die. And the game has a happier ending. But we did lose Terrico, though. Terrico sacrificed his life, and that felt kind of forced, though, how he was the saving grace. Like, it was one thing for him to be the time travel gimmick in this game, but the fact that the characters couldn't defeat Calamity Ganon unless he jumped in and self-destructed on him, that felt a little forced. I don't see why an explosion from him was more powerful than, like, an explosion from Link's bombs or... So, yeah, that felt kind of forced, but it was trying to force in a dramatic moment where the character sacrificed himself, and that scene felt kind of too late, though, because they already teased that they killed off the character earlier, because there was a part where Calamity Ganon possessed him, and you're forced to fight him against your will, so you had no choice but to defeat him, and there's, like, a really sad and dramatic flashback, the Zelda, like, remembering him from her childhood, and she remembers who he is, and, yeah, it's a pretty sad moment, and then that encourages her to, want to finish Calamity Ganon once and for all. Then you get to him, and then none of your attacks are doing any damage, and it reveals that Terrico was still alive, and then he gets up, charges in, and self-destructs it. So it's like, okay, we witnessed him die already. They're forcing us to witness him dying again, and once again it tries, like, encouraging Zelda to keep on fighting. It's like, are you kidding me? We just did this scene moments ago. You can't just repeat it twice. And not to mention, I didn't think it was as impactful as the first fake out death. But yeah, he actually does get killed off, or does he? Because I still don't know, but the game teases that you can rebuild him, because they're telling you to collect, like, scattered parts of him throughout certain levels, and then you can synthesize them to rebuild him. And so I'm guessing once you rebuild him, they'll make him a playable character, I'm guessing. This game has a happy ending, so it leaves you to wonder if this is like an alternate timeline version of it, or, like, does Nintendo consider this canon in an alternate form, or is it just, entirely a spin-off? Because, I mean, it's possible this could be an alternate timeline. I mean, many of the Zelda games were revealed to be alternate timelines, and they were all based off the endings of Ocarina of Time. And so that was one thing that was kind of interesting about this game. So we already saw what would have happened in that world if they lost. That's what the plot of Breath of the Wild was. And so this game showed you what would have happened if Calamity Ganon was defeated before everyone died. And so, yeah, it was kind of neat to see that possibility, but at the same time, I kind of wish they just stuck with the original story. I don't know, the ending just felt kind of half-assed. It felt rushed, and it's like you were hoping to see a little bit more after defeating Calamity Ganon, seeing the characters rejoice, or seeing what they're going to do next, and it just doesn't bother doing that, and that was kind of underwhelming. It just gives a proper send-off to the future descendants as they get sent back to their future timelines, and then it's like, wait a minute, they changed the course of history. They're acting like they're getting sent back to their own timelines, and it's like, will these characters even still exist? Like, I can definitely imagine characters like Sidon will still exist, though, because he was the younger brother of Mipha, and it was shown that he was still a little kid in this game, along with the DLC for Breath of the Wild. But as for some of the other characters, like the Goron descendant, Rivali's descendant, and then Urbosa's little sister, or descendant, whatever, it's like, were they even alive yet? Would they still have even been born if Calamity Ganon was never defeated? And so, yeah, it left me with a lot of questions, but overall, it's like, okay, this is the happy ending version of Breath of the Wild. You could almost call it like a fan fiction, but for the most part, it was an entertaining fan fiction, though. But it's still, I don't know, I kind of was waiting to see like a really tragic story. I mean, Nintendo was teasing that. They said, see what really happened 100 years ago and all that, and they really subverted our expectations. Unlike the original Hyrule Warriors, where its story was mostly forgettable and just a lame excuse to bring these characters together, this one started off feeling like it was going to have a promising story. It still felt like not completely well told, though. There were still many gaps and missing pieces in this story, but compared to the story of the original Breath of the Wild, it was a little more coherent, though, and it left me looking forward to seeing how it was going to happen. Like how exactly each of these characters died, when they died, and I was kind of looking forward to seeing that game tell us. And while the game kind of gives hints on where and when it happened, it's like they don't go through with it, though. So we don't get to see the aftermath of, how Zelda responds to seeing Link die. I was really expecting this game to tug at your heartstrings, and the only time the game tugged at my heartstrings was when Terrako died and Zelda had that flashback to him. But other than that, it's like, yeah, the story, it definitely subverted expectations, but I can't say it left me entirely satisfied, though. That being said, though, the story in this game was still more entertaining than the one in the original Hyrule Warriors. I was just bored out of my mind with that story. I did not care for any of the new characters they introduced in that, and so it was nice that this game was very sparing with new characters. There were barely any new characters in this game. So overall, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, it was a pretty fun game, though. The story was a bit inconsistent, and the graphics and frame rate was definitely something to be more desired, but for the most part, it was fun, though. I had a real good time playing as all these different characters, even seeing the characters who weren't meant to be in the original prequel plot of Breath of the Wild, be shoehorned in there. It was still fun to be able to play as them, at least, and part of me wonders, though, I think this game should have went with the original dark ending, but then it's like, after that, there's post-game content where it gives you the option to go back and show what would have happened if the characters were spared. Show the true original dark ending, and then have the alternate ending, the true ending be the one where it shows what would have happened if Terrako succeeded in traveling back in time and saving everyone. And that would have been a fun possibility. I mean, the game's length was long enough to where it could have pulled that off, but it looks like halfway through the game, that's when it looks like they're going to kill the characters off finally, but then they subvert your expectations and just change the course of history. And so a part of me kind of wishes that they did go those separate routes, have the bad ending, then the true ending. That would have been kind of a neat way to approach this game. I'd probably give the game about like a 7 out of 10. Well, that's all I have to say for now. Thank you for watching. See you next time, and have a great day.